Look no further than Fans with Laptops. It's a specialized course tailored for aspiring sports enthusiasts like you. Uncover the secrets of the press box, learn how to create compelling stories from scratch, and discover the best methods to share your content online. If you like these live chats, head over to our main channel where we have all sorts of video on this World Cup. There'll be several every week with all the latest trends, stories, and incredible historical content. Welcome to Wagon Wheel. I'm Jarrod Kimber. Probably helps if I look vaguely in the direction of the camera. This is the podcast where we talk about trends in cricket and questions in cricket and the things you've always wanted to ask, but too afraid to ask so far. But yes, no, feel free in the comments to ask away. Obviously, the best chance of getting answered is always with a super chat, but hey, just depends on how much time I have to fill after I've gone through all the Patreons, really, if we're being very, very honest. So let us get through. We always start with the questions from Patreon. That's the best way to go. If you sign up as a Patreon member, you can ask questions like Ian has, who says, Mitchell Johnson has quite forcefully, there's quite a few Mitchell Johnson questions, actually. I think we talked about it on Uncovered as well. I didn't realize it would be an ever unfolding soap opera that it has become. And B, that so many of you would be so interested. It's really fascinating, especially because I know it's very rare that there's a story of this size where I know kind of everyone involved. It's so bizarre for me personally, right? And isn't that what this is really about? Mitchell Johnson has quite forcefully questioned whether David Warner deserves a hero's send-off. Warner has always divided opinion, with some cricket people being ardent supporters and others being genuinely disliking him. Where do you think the majority of opinion is in Australia on him? He is weird because he's never really been universally loved. And I'm not sure that he's kind of got a personality that kind of should be universally loved. Like, I don't mean that in a bad way, but like, you know, he is a bit of an angsty guy, you know, an aggressive person at times. So you can see why people would have issues with him. He says what he feels and everything, and he rubs up people the wrong way. I mean, he certainly never was as respected the right way or as loved as Steve Smith was. He's probably more in that Michael Clarke mold of, there are some people who do really genuinely love him, and certainly some people who love his game. But overall, I think that I always feel like the Australian public is waiting for a reason not to like him again. So even when he does something good, they go back on him. But yeah, he's a complicated figure. And Mitch Marsh has probably opened up the fact that even in cricket, not everyone loves him. He's not the most popular person, I think, at all times. But I think he's probably, compared to some people I know in cricket, he's very much himself. Like he is. That is David Warner. What you see is what you get. And not everyone likes what they see, right? And I think he has a more complicated legacy than, say, Steve Smith, who's a better player. I'm trying to think of other players. Aaron Finch, who, when remembered, will be remembered very fondly by a lot of different people. Like everyone kind of loved Finchy, and that wasn't the case with Dave, right? Like with Davey, it's different. It's obviously different. And Mitchell Johnson has stuck a cricket bat into a hornet's nest there. This Patreon doesn't have a name on it for some reason. Sorry about that. What test series are you most excited for in the upcoming months? I suppose India, England is the main one. Other than the fact it's a big series, it's a long series. And I think, Bazball in Asia is, the movie we've all been waiting for. Like Police Academy in Russia. No, Mission to Moscow, wasn't it? That's a fact that no one needed, but there you go, you have it. So I'll be covering India, South Africa as well, which I'm also interested in because, they're such a good bowling team. This question is from Bobby O. Sorry. Muku just behind the scenes like a ninja. I think the South Africa series I'm still very interested in, but I can't see how South Africa's batting can overcome India's bowling, and it's a short series. The Other test series I'm not as interested in. I would have been more interested in Bangladesh, New Zealand, had it not come so close after the World Cup. The India-Australia women's series, I don't know how much I'll watch of that, but I'll certainly follow it quite a bit. I'm taking a winter off following Australian cricket, just because I like to sleep at normal hours or normal-ish. I'm happy to get up at 5 a.m. for India, or whatever the start times are in those games, but the overnights, I might only ever do them for like World Cups and Ashes and stuff in the future, or unless maybe Australia, India, or if another great rivalry springs up, just because they kill me now. I'm just getting too old. Can't even get up to watch basketball games unless the Nuggets are in the finals anymore. But yeah, so I think certainly India-Australia women is something that I've been interested in. Certainly, if not watching, then following. I'm trying to think if there's anything else on the future tours program that he quickly. I've got a pretty solid schedule already booked, so from that perspective, I have I've done, as I was saying before, I've done a lot of things on time zone. So you'll notice that I'm commentating on West Indies, England in the one days. Again, very good time zone for me. Also, TalkSport is paying me to be involved. All these things make things a lot more likely for me to actually do them. But yeah, I kind of have to factor that in. I'm just trying to remember if there was one other smaller series that I was interested in, which is yeah. So I'll probably now, with Bangladesh winning that first test against New Zealand, might watch a little bit more of that one. There is an Island Zimbabwe test, I suppose I will have my eye on. What else? And then in January, there's an Island Afghanistan again. Might have a sneaky little look at that one, depending on how things go out. But certainly, India England is something that I've been penciled in for a long time. So yeah, I think those are the ones I've got coming up. I should know more of this, of course, but try my own schedule and my own interests change, I suppose. Ellie says there used to be a lot of non-ICC tournaments in the 80s and 90s, like the Sharjah Cup, the Nehru Cup, the Benson and Hedges Cup. I feel like those tournaments are fairly forgotten, even though at the time their importance was comparable to the Champions Trophy. What do you think about their legacy? It's also where a lot of fixing happened, which is part of the reason that they're forgotten. You had a lot of players playing one-day cricket when they didn't really care that much about one-day cricket in foreign locations where they didn't always try their best. There was fixing in a lot of those tournaments as well, because you weren't playing for your home fans, and quite often your home fans weren't even watching a lot of those games. Benson Hedges maybe slightly more, because Australian cricket was broadcast a little bit better around the world. Look, they existed. Cricket has, was formed, really. The ICC was formed on the back of a tri-series between Australia, South Africa, and England. So those tournaments have their own format of importance. I think eventually they just worked out that bilaterals were far better because the home team played in them and you made more money and you lost money from the other ones. But as a young kid, I love watching it. The ability to watch Sri Lanka play the West Indies in Adelaide was actually kind of a cool thing, because you got a really good understanding of where those teams were on talent wise. But overall, I don't think they're going to have much of a legacy in cricket. I'm not sure the Champions Trophy will either, if we're being honest. Although maybe it will, because it'll come back in T20, right? So maybe I'm wrong. Ben said, last week James asked a great question, well done, James, around nationality requirements. As things stand currently, who decides qualification rules? I assume the individual boards. Could a nation change their rules to get a generational player for them to qualify without lengthy periods? Yeah. Jofra Archer? What would the fallout be? Could the ICC do anything to stop the individual board? So the ICC have regulations, and then some nations have individual regulations. You can't beat the ICC regulations. I won't be able to go into them off the top of my head, but they have, a fairly strict policy of how many days you need to live in a country, for how long, all these different things. Plus, of course, passports and marriages and all these different things. I think Imran Tahir was a marriage won, and he still had to wait a few years before he actually started playing for South Africa. So there's all these micro rules and everything else, but individual countries then have their own rules on top of that. So for instance, I don't even know what the rules are that the BCCI have. I'm not sure they would never need it, but I don't know, maybe they would. Maybe some NRI comes back home and they're like, well, this guy could do things that no one else can, so let's get him in the side. So that's certainly the case. But it was very funny to, I think, a lot of us who kind of followed this stuff when England had very strict policies on these things and then did change them a little bit for Jofra Archer. But Jofra Archer, you know, his father is British and was it tube driver, bus driver, something like that. And then also the regulations changed a little bit if you've played underage cricket for the nation. And certainly if you played senior cricket for the nation. And then you're trying to move. So yeah, they're all little kind of stuff out there. But no, the ICC are the ones who make the overall rules. There's also a difference between going from a major team to a minor team and from a minor team to a major team. So you can play for Ireland on a Tuesday and England on a Wednesday, but you can't play for Australia on a Thursday and Papua New Guinea on a Friday. I think I got all my days of the weeks right there. So you once you've gone up to, I think it's a test playing nation, but I might be wrong. They might just be certain nations that have picked there. But I think that was the big Dirk Nannes thing, because there was a thought that, you know, someone like Dirk Nannes could come along and play for both teams when he was picked in both teams. And that's what the authorities didn't want. They didn't want him playing, especially, I'm not saying this was a Dirk Nannes specific rule, but they didn't want someone like Dirk Nannes basically playing for the Dutch or the Australians like they were franchise teams. Which again, I think is fair. It is international sport, and if you're a South African or an Indian and you want to qualify somewhere else, and then play in that other place, and you're willing to take a couple of years out of your life as a professional to qualify in that other place, I think that's more than fine. But then you can't play for New Zealand on a Tuesday and then go, well, can I go back and play for my original nation? Ben says, cricket history, what if? From 2002 onwards, Zimbabwe has a stable, democratic, and sane government. Given their strength at the time and the seemingly bright future they had as a cricket nation, where do you think Zimbabwe cricket would be in the present day? Don't think it's as strong as you think it would be, Ben. It's still a financial issue, I think, as much as anything else with them. Although you're right, you know, the politics and the cricket governance are an issue all the way through for them. Probably around the, West, they would have flirted with being the 6th best team at times. I can't see them getting any higher than that. They probably mostly would be between the 7th and the 11th best team. But they would have been a lot more consistent with that. We would have got more players from them. Perhaps what could have helped them is that a lot of those talented players who we probably don't even know about, ones that end up playing school cricket in England and stuff like that, if they got to play for Zimbabwe, they've been seen by franchises, that would have actually helped develop Zimbabwe cricket a little bit earlier. We know that there are Zimbabwean players who probably should have been in franchise cricket earlier, but we didn't know about them enough, or the team was so dreary, no one cared. So I do think all those things are an issue, but I still don't think they could ever be higher than 6th, based on what I know of their talent. So they've lost. I always forget that young kid who plays school cricket in England, who we don't even know how good he is, but he's young anyway, so maybe he doesn't count. They've lost some other players who maybe would have been good role-playing internationals, but Balance is probably the only star batter that they probably missed out on. I don't know as much about the bowlers. But yeah, I find it hard to think that I think the 90s were a bit of a golden generation in many ways. So I do think that played a big part. Hamza says, how has your day been? What has my day been today? I did some tutoring for sports writing, which you can do through my Patreon, I suppose, if you're interested. I did a meeting with the Cricket 8 team, who are obviously looking at coming up with a new cricket property, and we did some watch-alongs during the World Cup. I've done a lot of admin stuff, I think, today. I watched a basketball game that I missed a couple of weeks ago. Oh, not even a couple of weeks ago, but watched a basketball game that I wanted to listen to watch. I'm slowly getting back into full work mode, but I think mentally I'm still struggling to get there at times. We had that video go up today, so that took a lot longer than we all thought it would. But it's a long video. It's 18 minutes long, I think. Really interesting video about the World Cup final and what happened to India. So if you haven't seen that, please head over there. A lot more talk about Evan Galbus, as you would expect. And it's raining at the moment in London, and I'm supposed to be taking my kids to tennis. So I'm now trying to work out if there's going to be any tennis on, and if not, how I'm going to handle the children at home and what's going to go on there and everything else. But yeah, it's fine. Thank you, Hamza. It's possible he asked that on a different day, by the way, which I don't even know what that says. Christopher says, how much does England struggle to produce fast bowlers hinder them in ODI bowling? It's always been mentioned when England play tests away, but not so much with limited overs. Winning the World Cup was combined when they had two genuine quicks. Yeah, I mean, Plunkett probably wasn't a genuine quick by that stage, was he? But I get your point, oh, no, Wood was in the side, wasn't he? So, yeah. So, Australia won the World Cup. Which one of the Australian bowlers would you say is a genuine quick now? But Australia and India certainly, maybe along with South Africa and New Zealand, had the four best seam bowling attacks, and they were the finalists. What would we have in 2019? New Zealand made it through to the final with very good seam bowling. India should have. Australia were in the semi-final there again. I think with England, I think you're kind of on the right point here, Christopher. They're very good at bowling with the new balls, right? It's through the rest of the game that they struggled. And so Plunkett was, and we all said this at the time, massively undervalued by fans. And it's already looking, at least in one World Cup, like they should have brought the big man from Philly back, right? So, yeah, I do think there is an issue there. I don't know if that is why they're not bowling well at the death, though. I don't think there's any reason why England bowlers shouldn't be good at the death. Like compared to other nations, I should say. When they went all in on the all-rounders, and, we could see that now with Bryden Carson struggling. It was Bryden Carson and Sam Curran getting smacked again in the game the other day. When they've gone all in with this all-rounder thing again, they are intentionally weakening their bowling. You can't tell me that there aren't slightly stronger bowling options around there. And we've seen, obviously, it's why Reece Topley keeps getting a game, right? Because they probably do think he, outside of Jofra, is their best white ball bowler. But because he can't bat, they're like, well, we can only keep space for like one of him and one of Wood and one of Atkinson. They might have to reconsider their all-round strategy, which would be a shame because that was lovely. But I don't know if their team is strong enough anymore to be able to do. Well, I don't know if their all-rounders are strong enough as they're currently constructed to do that. James says, how do you think Glenn McGrath would have fared against Bazball? Given that his main weapon was metronomic accuracy, one might argue that it'd be too predictable, but his extra bounce could be a big complication. So if you go back, and this was late Glenn McGrath, so I do think we have to be honest there. But if you go back to late Glenn McGrath, KP would sort of do this against him, wouldn't he? KP took his length away and said, you're not going to be able to bowl this consistently against me. And so, with that in mind, that's one of your superpowers gone. I haven't had a look to see what, the overall record of those two players was against each other in test match cricket. I suppose one-day cricket would be as well. But I think that was something that was very noticeable. But that was also an easier thing to do. Could you have done that against the young Glenn McGrath? I suppose now everyone's doing it against everyone. But as you've said, because of that height, in some ways, Hazelwood is a modern Glenn McGrath, a slightly different kind of bowler, but also similar enough. Maybe doesn't get as much of the steep bounce between the two. Yeah, but I think it's comparable, right? Just having a look here. So KP still averaged 27 against McGrath in Test cricket, and in one-day cricket, he made 46 runs from 52 balls without being dismissed. So not a lot to go on there. As a comparison, Look, I think it would have been a different challenge. The same that, if Richard Hadley bowled now, he probably wouldn't be an outswing bowler, right? He would be different. So you have to meld yourself to the conditions and the opposition as they're playing. Murali would be a very different bowler. And we saw late career Murali and late career Warne, how different they were than early career, right? And part of that is just the injuries and the wear and tear. But a lot of it was actually that umpires started giving out LBWs and the game started changing. So they had to keep the bowled and LBWs in play a lot more than they did when they were younger. And so McGrath would have been okay. I mean, you're talking about a great bowler. He would have had the reinforced seam. He would certainly have a wobble ball. His bouncer was really, really good as well. And as you pointed out, the extra bounce, he works it out. How he works it out, I don't know. But one thing I'm very confident of is the fact that McGrath is positive that he could have worked it out. James says, what sort of surface do you think is most beneficial for the development of young cricketers? A hard wicket, and I assume he means an AstroTurf wicket here, or turf. So I think all around the world that kids should be playing on hard wickets. They should be getting, they shouldn't be worrying about the vagaries of turf wickets until they understand the very basics of shot making as a batter and landing the ball on a length as a bowler. Almost make them do it on the most benign surface possible so that they get their movements correct. They get into the right positions. They, understand pressure as a bowler rather than worrying about everything else. And once you get to, 12, 13, 14, even 15 and 16, you then move on to learning all the things that you need to learn about turf pitches and everything else. If you're a above average talent, you're going to play a lot of cricket. So I don't think you're ever going to be in a situation where you're disadvantaged. I mean, I didn't play on turf. Might not have played my first game on turf till I was 14 or 15. I don't think that's affected how I went. In fact, the biggest change I had was just that first year. Other than that, I now probably have more trouble going back to synthetic than anything else. But again, I had a solid technique, or solidish technique to go with. So yeah, I would say the hard wickets are the best. The consistency of that allows you to groove your game. Like if you watch a young tennis player, right? It's literally you're teaching them to go down then up, right? And you want them to get used to that movement. You probably don't want them to play on a grass court where sometimes the ball's going to skid low. Sometimes when it's a bit dry, it might bounce a little bit higher because you want them to groove that movement. And I think it's exactly the same with cricket. Jake says, another Warner Johnson question. When he says another, am I going to have like another 34 coming up? Johnson said that Warner has never really owned the ball tampering scandal. Wouldn't you say that he owned it way more than anyone else? Bancroft, the culprit, Smith, the captain. They're all the culprits. I'm not having Bancroft as the culprit, but I see what you're saying. Plus many other players, coughs all the bowlers. Yeah, I mean, if you're comparing Warner to all the rest of Cricket Australia's employees, then he's owned it a lot more than, James Sutherland or Darren Lehman or David Saker did. Certainly the bowlers, but all the players. It wasn't just the bowlers who knew about it. Everyone knew about it. And support many of the sports staff as well. However, if you compare him to Bancroft and Smith, no, I think that I don't think anyone's owned it more than, all three of them have basically come out. Warner probably took a little bit longer to get started, and maybe that's what Mitch is remembering there. I don't know, obviously, without getting him on the podcast to chat about, and I'm not going to get him on the podcast to chat about this. He's talked about it with Bharat again, which was great to see those two getting that podcast up. It was awesome to pair them up together, or not that I paired them up, that they wanted to pair up, but getting them on 99.94 network, and it's great that they've come back again. But yes, I think it's fair to say that Warner owned it. He certainly spent a lot of time talking about it. Almost feel like he spent more time talking about it than Smith or Bancroft overall, but maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, I don't think that's a fair thing to say. I think Mitch has now come out and admitted that there's some personal issues there as well. Warner had said something to him that he didn't like after he had said something that Warner didn't like. Blah 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 blah. It really is a soap opera, and George Bailey texts me at the wrong time, and all this sort of stuff. Having been behind the scenes a little bit, it's nice to see some of these things. It's also, isn't it nice to see this happen? Like I think when this happens, we go, "Oh, Asian cricket at it again." And it's like, well, these things happen in the West as well. They're usually just better at kind of quietening up, unless you have someone like Warner or KP who seems to drag these things out into the public a little bit more. Vikas says, "Why would GT trade Hardik Pandya for cash? They should have said to MI either give us Surya or Bumrah plus one more player." I think that would have been a hard sell. If MI said no, GT should have said no as well. They could have said to MI, "We will release him and you can buy him from the auction." I can't accept the fact that GT gave them MI what they wanted with a few $1 million. That could have made much more money in sponsorship from the players. Yeah. There was another trade. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, and I talked to the people involved because I was a little bit miffed by it. And the people involved sort of said, "Yeah, we're kind of with you, Jarrod. We probably shouldn't have done this for cash." But when the owners were told they could make a lot of cash from this, they were like, "Great, well, that means we don't have to spend as much cash next year on something." I'm not sure that really works when you think about, I mean, it gives them a little bit of extra cash. It clears room off their books. But as you say, there's another way of doing that. They could have made Mumbai overpay for him. Perhaps they didn't see Mumbai as a threat anymore. But yeah, I find it hard to believe that this is a good way of doing it. Look, I don't think they would have got Surya Kumar or Bumrah, right? But I think you say to Mumbai, "Okay, you want to give us cash? Great. We will take a couple of $1 million here, and that will help next year, and we don't have to spend as much money out of our own pockets. But we need, I don't know, a backup spinner, and we are interested in this young kid who you signed last year. Cash, spinner, prospect. You're weakening Mumbai a little bit there. You'll make it so they don't have a backup spinner anymore. You have a young prospect who hopefully your team rates quite highly, or at least you think is a chance of making it, and you've made cash. I think the lack of draft assets or auction assets is an issue in some of these places, although quite a few other leagues you could actually trade your draft assets, I believe, but no one does. I can't see how this is a good idea. I've said this a million times, but let me say it one more time. If they were playing in two different divisions and you did this and you're just clearing up your books, you only have to probably play against that other player in the finals, right? But there's one division. You're going to have to go up against Mumbai a couple of times, and you have made your opposition stronger, which means your chance of making the finals is now less. Why would you want to do that? How does that benefit you? Any way you can weaken them out of this situation. And your other point about the allowing him back into the draft and everything else, I suppose then they don't get any. But again, it could weaken Mumbai. So there is an argument to be said for that as well. But I don't know. I wouldn't have done this. But I'm not sure there are many trades in cricket history that I would have done. And it's really frustrating as someone who grew up with sports trades to watch them done so poorly over and over again. Like most of the questions I get are, so when there's it's really interesting. The people who grew up in non-tradey sports, so football, where you have the transfer market, or in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, where they're just their sports don't have major trades. They like, why are you obsessing over this? But if you grew up in following American sports or Australian sports where trades happen really regularly, you're sitting there going, why would you give up one of the most important assets in cricket and get no assets back? Why are you not weakening your opposition? Why are you not getting blood out of a stone? Well, I suppose you can't get blood out of a stone, but you know what I mean? To hit Mumbai somewhere. It does. They don't. Mumbai will just splash cash. You're not affecting them by asking for cash, right? And I don't think that helps the Titans win the title. And that's the most important thing for me. Was that Vickers, wasn't it? Rudra says Anderson and Steyn are now known for their limited overs bowling. Are now not known for their limited overs bowling, but they're actually pretty good in limited overs. What changed? Neither of them won World Cups. I think is a huge factor. they were both better in red ball cricket, I think, is the other factor. I think with Anderson, I remember early on in his career looking at these averages, kind of exchanging with, although I think eventually he still ended up with a pretty good record, didn't he? I mean, if you look at Anderson, he was a brilliant white ball bowler when he was really, really young. Then he became more of a, you know, an average white ball bowler over time. Like his record is 29. And I just want to have a look at the years. If you have a look here, so he averages 23 and 22 in his first 25 matches. So outstanding. Has one poor year, then pulls it back, and then he has a year in 2008. He averages 74, averages 33 in 2010, 35. You know, we're getting a little number wangy here. Did average 15 in 2013, by the way, when he had a good time at the Champions Trophy and no one could play him. But those last 2 years, he played 20 games and averaged around 30, which is his overall mark. The point being, there aren't that many exceptional years there. So other bowlers were better, and he's certainly better as a red ball bowler than he is as a white ball bowler. On top of that, he's probably been best in the last 8 years with the red ball, and at that stage, he hasn't played any white ball cricket. I think Dale Steyn is a little bit different, just because I do think there is. I do think the lack of winning a World Cup specifically hurt his overall record. But again, I think he was a better red ball bowler than he was white ball. The other thing with him is he played 93 Test matches and only 125 ODIs. I think there's a few things that play a part there. But again, I just don't think you could argue that he wasn't a better. I mean, I would probably rank him as Test bowler, T20 bowler, and then ODI bowler. So it's his third best format. So you're rating yourself against yourself at a certain point. So I think all those things probably had played a part with those guys over time. All right, let's have a quick break here. And then after this break, we will be back with more questions from Patreon and then anything that is interesting from the room. I'm Jarrod Kimber. This is Wagon Wheel. Wagon Wheel. Wagon Wheel. Have you ever considered a career in sports? If you're passionate about writing, creating videos, or podcasting within the sports realm, I have the perfect course for you, Fans with Laptops. It is based on my career of someone who broke into this job despite the fact that at the age of 28, I was parking cars for a living. Take advantage of all the mistakes I made, use your passion, and enroll in the course today. Express your cricket fandom with Bodyline t-shirts. Discover their extensive range of player-inspired tees, featuring cricket legends such as Murali, Warne, and Wasim. With team-themed designs and options for hardcore cricket nerds, they've got you covered no matter what your interest in cricket is. All right, welcome back. Let us see who is next. Niran says, if two batters have averages 35 and 40, and the difference is 10 runs per game on average. The difference is 10 runs a game on average. Okay, yep, sorry, get you. If the same two batters have strike rates of 65 and 50, who would you pick? Test matches are rarely decided by 10 runs. Is it impossible to come up with a metric that takes both average and strike rate into account? Look, the average test match is going for 4 days at the moment. I can't see how the extra 10 runs consistently wouldn't be more important. 65 is not a game changer. I've said that if you want to have a strike rate that changes things, it needs to be 75 and above, really 80 and above. Because at that point, you could score so quickly that teams have to panic. They will bowl bowlers out of... So what you really want to do is you want to hit someone out of the attack. You want another bowler to come back on and do another spell despite the fact that they're already tired. And you want to stuff up with the overall plans for that day. That's what a fast batter does, right? At their best, they will also then score, let's say, 150 in just over a sessions. A cricket, which again, they move the game so quickly. 65 strike rate does not do that, right? 65 strike rate is a busy player, really. A good busy player, but a busy player. You're not really putting that much pressure back on the opposition, right? So think about it from this point. A 50 strike rate is 3 runs and over, and a 75 strike rate is 4 runs and over. Is that right? Oh my God. Yeah, I've got that right. Suddenly had a panic attack. So you're talking about, you're talking about someone going from 3 runs per over to what, 3.65-ish off the top of my head, runs per over. Does that put a lot more pressure back on the team? Do you know what I would rather have? The 10 extra runs. I would always rather have the 10 extra runs in that situation. Now, if you have a player who's averaging 35 but striking at 85, now you have a chaos merchant, right? Now you have someone that the other team has to have a special plan for, which might actually, they will plan more for than they would the batter who averages 40 with a strike rate of 50. Right? Even though the other player is better, they can't let this person get away. That might mean that they do bowl people out of things. They might mean that they panic. It might mean that they make bad decisions, right? And that's what fast scoring does, not 65 strike rate. That was near on. I don't know if I said it was near on, but it was near on. Rudra says, has Shai Hope gotten a lot better this year? He has. He seems to be scoring masses of runs at a faster rate. And I'm wondering if that's just my perception or if something has changed. Yeah, we talked about this on, I think I might have talked about this on Covered. But yeah, I looked it up because I've been commentating for TalkSport. You can actually, we're doing live watch-alongs too on YouTube. So if those games are on and you want to listen to us commentate, you can from on the YouTube channel. But yeah, let's have a look here. Oh my God. Yeah, 2023. So his run rate at the moment is a run a ball this year. He's never been above a run rate of 80 before. And I think coming into this game, it was well over the 90. So it wasn't just that last 100 took him to another level. So he's averaging 74 so far this year, but he has averaged over 63 times. So the run scoring ability hasn't really changed, but what he's done is just gone up. And I think it could be a variety of factors. I think he's maturing, so he's a better player. I think being a captain, it's harder to justify having the slow strike rate. And also he's starting to play a little bit more T20 cricket again and everything else. Oh, and I suppose the other thing is that he is legitimately a near ODI specialist as far as international cricket goes compared to many other people. He's just played more of it than other people. And as we saw with England, it's a problem when you don't play a lot of it. Philip says, do you think Rehan Ahmed might be used as a matchup to left-handers? His round armour from around the wicket combined with his googly seemed to be a good mix. Wondered if other googly bowlers have been used like this before, if the slower speed of the googly might make it ineffective for anything other than short spells. So the left arm bowlers, we have seen this before. You know, Paul Adams is the most famous version of this, where that makes sense. But left arm wrist spinners generally bowl more wrong-uns and are more set up. Their body sort of collapses more for the wrong-un naturally, just because that's the delivery that they have to take away from the right-handers, which means that their wrong-uns are usually just of a better level or a better quality. Now, we have seen occasionally at international level like wrong-un bowlers. So Ravi Bishnoi might be one of the most famous examples of this. But generally, right arm wrist spinners don't have the wrong-un as their major delivery. So Ravi Bishnoi, I think, could do this. Rehan Ahmed, I think, is too slow to do this. And I think that's his bigger issue, is that he's just a little bit slower than other wrist spinners. Unless he has a cool deep like revolution, I think he might struggle to be able to do this. But yeah, it's something he could try. I've done this before as a wrist spinner, and I was always taught not to. But actually, the angle does cause some problems. The problem is that your wrong-un needs to be really, really strong. And so if you do it against good players, which is when I tried it, they were just basically waiting for the odd drag down or the over pitch. And it's just loopier. You know, the weight comes out of your fingers. People like Bishnoi and Rehan Ahmed can mitigate that a little bit and change things a little bit when it comes to that. I just don't know if it's going to be a consistent enough weapon, though, for most bowlers, but we will eventually see bowlers who will do this. And because of that angle coming in and going away, I think it makes a lot of sense. James says, do you remember the first summer of cricket that is still vividly stored in your memory? And what was, if there is one, a particular moment that cemented your love for cricket as a boy? So I've said this before. I don't have a great answer for this, only because like I was born into a cricket family where everyone played cricket and our whole weekend was cricket. And I was taken to the training sessions and net sessions and everything. So for me, I didn't realize that there was a life without cricket. So by the time I realized I had fallen in love, and obviously I showed a love for it and wanted to be involved with it. I remember being given my first bat, which was a cut down of someone had broken their bat playing a slog shot, and the guys came in, they sawed off the handle and sawed off the bat, and literally gave me a junior bat, which was probably still way too heavy for me, but at least I could hold it and pretend I was playing cricket. And a lot of my early memories of loving cricket are actually from the cricket club that I came from, Camberfield, which sadly is now closed. But I've written a book about my time there, which is called The Lily of Camberfield, which is it's kind of about my relationship with my father as much as anything, but a lot of stuff about that cricket club as well. I've written about that cricket club a few times. So a lot of my early memories are from that. From a professional standpoint, I remember going to a Sheffield Shield game, which I want to say was a Boxing Day game, but it might have been a New Year's game, Victoria and New South Wales. And I remember, my memory is this happened first ball of the day. It probably didn't. But Mike Whitney steaming into bowl delivery and falling over on his ass. Then I watched a lot of cricket on TV around that time. And I remember David Boone making 100 against John Embry, Adelaide or Sydney. And I just remember him touching his balls a lot and finding that very funny. And my dad not finding it as funny as I did. And then going to Australia, Pakistan, which was my first international game. So it must have been 10 or 11 when Pakistan toured, and Wasim Akram and Imran Khan. But I mean, Imran Khan was famous, but watching Wasim Akram kind of before he was famous, certainly outside of Pakistan, and not being able to see the ball. So it was the first time in my life I remembered not being able to see the ball. And that was, so those were the main ones that I remember. James says, which is the best all wicketkeepers T20 top 6? Cal Rogue, Ishan Kishan, Sanjay Sampson, Rishabh Pant, Jitesh DK, or Butler, Salt, Bairstow, Ben Duckett, Billings, Tom Banton. This is best. You've got Butler, Salt. Oh, because Rishabh Pant's in the other one. I don't ever like going against Rishabh Pant. I think it's England on that one, isn't it? I think that's right. The Banton of it does bother me a little bit. And I'm not sure I want DK to bat top 6. I want him to bat number 7, but that's a whole different argument, I suppose. I think it's England because Butler, Salt, Bairstow is better than Rahul, Pant, Kishan. I think T20. I think that's right. Aditya says, if you had a fully fit Hardik Pandya, I would ride him like a pony. And at peak Kapil Dev, who would you go for in the all-rounder spot of an all-time Indian ODI 11? I would go for Kapil Dev because it's harder to find a frontline bowler who can bat at number 6 or 7 than it is to find a batter who can be your 5th bowler, I think. Kapil Dev also had a strike rate like, what was his strike rate in ODI cricket? This is an ODI question, is it? Or is it a test cricket question? It says ODI. Oh, yeah, good. Phew. That was going to panic me because then I would have to refactor in everything. His strike rate of 95. So yeah, top 0.1% percentile on his strike rate. And average 23. So you've got probably the best death hitter in the world. And then with the ball, you have a guy averaging 27 with economy of 3.7. Can shore up an end, more than comfortable bowling at the death. I just think he has slightly more versatility and you can use him in slightly different ways. I don't think that I don't want that to be seen as like a slam on Hardik. I'd have to go into the numbers really, really deep and think about it a little bit more. But I just think that Kapil Dev can bat at 7, Hardik can bat at 6 or 5. Hardik probably can't ever be your 4th best bowler, as Kapil Dev can be your 1st bowler, right? And if you wanted to, you could have a lineup where you had Jadeja, because you'd have Jadeja in this team, right? So you'd have Jadeja at 6 and Kapil Dev at 7. And you now have 6 frontline bowlers if you want them. And Shardul could play because you've allowed yourself some Evan Golbus effect. Of course you have. All right, last one from Patreon. Oh, I don't have the name here. Do you think Williamson is New Zealand's greatest batter? higher than Crowe and has a legitimate claim to be New Zealand's second greatest cricketer behind Richard Hadlee. I think Williamson's test record, the more you delve into it, the more uncomfortable you feel about it. I was listening to a podcast today, Thinking Basketball podcast, and they were talking about Luka Doncic. And they were talking about kind of his box score stats compared to his advanced stats. And you can see why so many people love Luka. And obviously they were talking about the eye test and everything he can do on a basketball court. But when you actually start to delve into his record a little bit more, there is some areas that are, I don't know if concerning is the right way, but a little bit like, oh, is he as good as we thought he was? And I think with Williamson, certainly in Test cricket, which I'm assuming what the majority of this question is, Williamson has some real weird holes, like good teams that he's never scored runs against. And it was Aditya. And then me and Muku did that by both pressing the button at the same time. Yeah, I think he's got some teams and some locations that he really struggles against. Martin Crowe is interesting because Martin Crowe took a long time to get going, but once he did, he scored a lot of runs. But he also scored a lot of runs in an era where people did not score a lot of runs. Did things like overcoming, reverse swing, which give him a boost. Like, being the first, well, certainly the first non-Pakistani, but you could argue maybe the first major batter to really work it out. I think they're much closer, despite the fact their batting averages are very different. I think Williamson and Crowe are a lot closer when you start to dig in, but I still think Williamson has to be above him. I would find it hard to say that's not the case, but we obviously have a book out about these sorts of things, and I think Williamson is the lowest of the test of the big four. Despite the fact he might end up with one of the higher averages, he might end up with the second highest average. I think when you start to pare that record down, it just doesn't look as good as the sort of the base counting stats make it look. All right, let's take a break. And after the break, we'll come back with some chats. And we've got a new sponsor here. And look, these things really help us. Click on the link, use the code, do whatever I say to do in the ad. A really big thank you to a new sponsor coming on board. Where a huge thank you to Wicket Cricket Manager, of course, who were with us for a while. I'm sure hoping they'll be back. And HCL, who might come back very quickly as well. But any way you can help us with new sponsors, always a great way, especially if you don't have any money to spend yourself. So go and use this thing. So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your Nord VPN plan, plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects its nether region with NordVPN today. All right. Someone said no one is interested, and then we've had about 40 messages. I love that. I don't really understand people all that much. Let me have a look at what else we have in the chat here as well. That's a tasty little one about a future Fab Four here. But keep the comments coming in as well, and we will see what else we have. But thank you to everyone who's put a comment in. Obviously, if you're desperate for one, Super Chat is the way to go. But let's start with Saksham, who says, what do you think about Harshal Patel to CSK? Is Alzari Joseph's batting underrated? He's got a strike rate of about 70 in ODI cricket. So if you're talking about as a T20 player, no. I mean, look, he can hold a bat. I think he shapes up quite well, and he looks like he can bat, but maybe I certainly don't think about Alzari much as a white ball player. What do I think about Harshal to CSK? I think Harshal Patel's a really good player, but I do think he's going to have down seasons, and I don't think I would sell his stock if he had a bad season. I think I'd be more likely to take him to a bunch of surgeons and check if his elbow is working exactly the way you want it to, or his shoulder, his wrist, whatever it is he imparts all his rotations with. Yeah, make sure that his arms in. I would like to know a lot more about him if that was the case. I think that because he had such a dramatic season, he was probably a little bit overpaid. And so with that, CSK have probably got him on a slightly better, slightly more manageable deal, would be my guess. I don't know. We don't always get all these details out there, but that would be my guess. I think at his best, Harshal Patel is an elite role player, right? And at their best, CSK works out how to use role players. So I think it could make sense. But I just think if you're a slow ball bowler who relies on the amount of rotations you put on a ball, you're going to have an up and down career. And we've already seen that with Harshal Patel. I would prefer to pay him a good amount of money, not an over the top amount of money, but literally say to him, but we're going to stick with you. Right? When you have that bad year, we're going to stick with you. And I'm not sure if that's quite what's happened with him here, but I don't know. I thought it was an interesting move. This is a really good question from ANZ Frat Boy, who says, who's the next Fab Four? Is it Shafiq, Brook, Gill, Rachin, Ravindra? Keen to hear your thoughts, even if there is a next Fab Four. So Shafiq, Brook, Gill, Ravindra. I suppose you would have Gerald Brevis. Is there any other young batters coming out that I'm missing? I think so. So you would probably throw him in as a fifth option there, although who knows if he'll ever play enough Test cricket. I don't think if you go back in history, we've had many Fab Fours. So I would lean more towards we won't have another Fab Four, right? Just because what were they? They were all born within 2 years of each other. 3 of them were from major nations all at the same time. Do you know, there was a lot of different things that kind of happened at the same point. So I would lead towards that not being the case. I think the 4 that you've mentioned with Gerald Brevis and maybe some of the other young South African batters, I kind of feel like there'll be another young South African great batter coming through very soon. But, just the look of the talent factory that they've had and, watching some of their juniors play, some of the footage I've seen, I think there will be, yes, I do think there will be a difference there. But yeah, I think it is a good question. I don't think there's anyone on your... We need to know more about some of these players, but all 4 of these are a genuine, chance. But as I said, that the next Fab Four is a big step up, right? Because you're talking about someone who's going to average 50 and dominate for a long period of time. Gill's the only one I feel really confident about in that group. And it's not that I don't think the others have the ability, but Gill's the only one where I look at that and go, I mean, he should, right? He just should. Ayo says, is Williamson's overseas record down to lack of opportunities compared to the rest of the Fab Four? Can't be technical. I think there are more than just holes with his overseas record that come down to what could be thought of as he hasn't played enough overseas, right? Like he has. I think I just want to quickly bring up his stats. I don't want to do a deep dive. It's really interesting, and he's one of the more fascinating players to look into when it comes to these sorts of things. So it's certainly, in our book, I think he'll be a really fascinating player to look at. So in South Africa, so this is why he's played 4 tests in South Africa and he averages 21. He has played 8 tests in India and averages 33. He's played 8 tests in England and averages 30. And in Australia, he averages 7 tests and averages 42. Those are pretty much the best attacks he's going to have to face in their home conditions, because he would have only played on Pakistan on the featherbeds, right? So every time, and you can do that as a combined number, every time he's gone up against the best attacks in their home conditions, he has struggled, right? And if you look at his home record, he averages 66. His away record, he averages 42. It's a little bit more than that when you throw in the neutral test, to be fair to him. It does pull him down a little bit. The teams that he makes a lot of runs against, so if it just forgetting where he scores his runs. So he averages 99 against Bangladesh, 64 against Pakistan, 78 against Sri Lanka, 60 against the West Indies, and 78 against Zimbabwe, right? 41 against Australia, 36 against England, 38 against India, 47 against South Africa. So the only really strong attack that he averages over 45 against, let's say, so a really strong average against is the South Africans, and obviously a lot of that is at home. That doesn't mean that he's terrible, because most players would have that. But as someone who's looked through a lot of records of great players, they were generally more. They usually have a really good attack that they go up against that they still dominate, or more than hold their own. It's an issue, you're right. And we're only talking about this because we're talking about someone who is a great player. Like, he's going to go down as, let's say, the second best New Zealand player ever. He's certainly going to go down as probably New Zealand's best batter. We're nitpicking, but compared to some other players, there's issues there. I think it's a really interesting thing going through it. Darshan says, can we please get a team-by-team analysis pre-IPL auction? I don't think, Darshan, we will. I think I'm more likely to look at the auction and then see if teams fill their gaps. Teams can come to me if they want that other information. But also just the dates and when everything's going to happen. I think, at around that point, we'll probably do the video afterwards. I kind of like that more anyway. I like getting into the nitty-gritty of the actual decisions rather than going, maybe they should try this or maybe they should go with this. So I probably more look at it from that perspective. If cricket keeps going this way, I think it's something that we would like to do more of in the future, but I don't think I'm going to get a chance to do it. Although we might do 2 videos. We might do a pre and a post, but I think it's more likely to be. We're certainly going to do a post one. We've already planned that. Pre, I'm not sure about at the moment. Ayosh says, how was McGrath spared but Pollock taken apart later in his career? I think that McGrath probably had a longer wingspan and was maybe slightly taller and got more bounce than Pollock. I think you can see that maybe throughout their entire careers. I think Pollock, as talented as a bowler he was maybe even slightly more one-dimensional than McGrath. And I also think that Pollock was a lot more dependent on the new ball than McGrath was. I know McGrath was very dependent on the new ball as well, but McGrath was pretty good kind of all the way through. But also it could have just been, I've never talked to both of them about this, but I know in Pollock's case that his body was really, really falling apart. And that was playing a big role in what was happening in his career at that point. So I definitely think that, that would be another part of it, right? That with perhaps with McGrath, there was just enough left, and sometimes that's the difference between the two. Where are we? Tino says, thoughts on the NBA in-season tournament? I was skeptical, but it was absolutely rocking in the Indy game. Well, Nuggets didn't go through, so it's pointless. No, look, I think this is an interesting thing, because the IPL will eventually come to this as well, of how do you build interest in those middle periods, right? And it did it. It's got enough. It's, if this is what it's like in year 1, it'd be really interesting to see what it is in year 5 or year 10. Obviously the FA Cup is, kind of the overall inspiration for it. I like it. It's made me slightly more interested in, who the Pelicans play? I can't tell that. Bucks. Pelicans must be playing the Pacers. No, got that wrong. Can't even remember now. I say I'm more interested now. I can't remember, but it's LA Phoenix. Then you've got Bucks, Knicks. So I know the Pacers are there. Kings are playing as well. Is it Kings, Pelicans, perhaps? So the fact that I know who's playing tells you that it's working at a certain level. Whereas on a normal midweek, like I wouldn't know who would play on a normal midweek game of an NBA, right? Unless the Nuggets were playing someone, and even then, more likely to know the Nuggets are playing. Maybe not even who they're playing. So those little things matter, and sports really need to think about how you engage with fans, not just make sure that the hardcores carry you through all the time. Isaac says, why would RCB want Cameron Green? He's a good top order bat, but they have Faf and Maxwell, and Green cannot bowl in white ball cricket. You wrote Bell, by the way, which I love. They are assuming that Green will develop into a bowler. Everyone is. Might be a few years away. Maxwell, they don't want to bat at number 3, really, do they? They probably want him at 4 or 5. Certainly 4. So that is the case. But I get your point. It does feel a little bit crowded up the top there. That's certainly very, very fair. Ayush says, Garry Sobers belted everyone except for Australia. He averaged 43. Good, but not top tier. Yeah, but there's a big difference between that and what we just talked about with Williamson, right? Whereas I think averaging again 43 against Australia, and Australia were a decent side. They weren't. He played against some very good attacks and probably some weak attacks in that case. He also made 260 against them, 240, whatever it was, against them in a game that didn't go on his overall record, which is worth remembering. Probably when he was past his peak or towards the end of his peak as well. So yeah, I think in Garry Sobers' case, but if you were to compare Sobers' record to Williamson, I think that you do see the difference of a player who is, I don't know if he's automatically a top 10 batter, but certainly has a very, very solid case for being a top 10 batter compared to where the other guys are. But so in Australia, he averages 46. So he actually struggled more against Australia at home. But Sobers actually averages 23 against New Zealand. But again, New Zealand weren't considered a strong team at that time. So I don't know how much you even factor that in. But it is worth remembering he averaged 15 in New Zealand. So he averages 46 in Australia, 53 in England, 99 in India, 15 in New Zealand, 33 from only 3 tests in Pakistan, and 66 when at home. So he's got that home and away thing a little bit. But again, he's got a much stronger away record overall. But there are holes in everyone. Like Bradman has holes, right? Like as in he's weaker against certain teams, certainly weaker against the best team, which was England. The question with Williamson is it's so many teams. And I think everyone gets a mulligan, like even if you're looking at great players on maybe one conditions or everything else. But we're trying to sift through the top 20 or 30 best players of all time. It gets tough at that point, right? It really does. And it's something that me and Shaun have come across quite a bit so far. Superjit says, why is there no grand celebration in Australia for World Cup win? Well, they've won a lot. It's not really cricket season when they went back. They won one 2 years ago. Yeah, look, cricket is a very big sport in Australia, but kind of in the heart of summer. If they'd won a World Cup at home in the heart of summer, it would have been the biggest thing ever. And 2015 was certainly a very, very big moment. But if you go back to 2015, I wouldn't say World Cup fever really took over Australia. It has a different relationship to cricket than many other nations do at the moment. And we see that all around the world with different places. But what are they at? 6, 7 major trophies plus all the other winning. It is different, I think, for Australia now than it has been. And I think the 87 World Cup was probably fated a lot more. They hadn't won anything like that before, and it was during an era where Australian sport wasn't as strong, and all these different things play a part, and everything else. That's me again. Thank you very much to everyone for popping on. And I will be back, of course, again next week. We have some Red Inkers as well that will be out. But if you haven't already seen it, go and check out the video on India Australia in the World Cup. And I'm working on in the World Cup final, I should say. And I am working on one other big video as well about Australia and winning DNA and all these sorts of things. I think the way I said that, you realised my overall point. But I want to look at how Australia won each of their ODI World Cups, because I think it's a really interesting thing to look at. And there are some similarities, but also some massive differences. But I'm Jarrod Kimber. This is the Wagon Wheel. Please support us. Please support our sponsors. Please support everyone. I mean, we live in a society, people. So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your Nord VPN plan, plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects its nether region with NordVPN today.